CNN, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Fox. These and other news media are used to educate consumers on what is happening around them. We all rely on these sources to really know what's going on. But do people really trust them? Do they trust the news that they are listening to every day? We became really interested in this topic and began to research and learn more about whether people think that the news media is politically biased. And as a result of this research, we came up with this meta question. Do BYU-I students think the news media is politically biased? As a result of this, today we will be discussing this question alongside what experts have to say on the topic, the findings we found, and some of the impact this topic has had all over the world.
In an article by Tian-Sung Lee, he also found that not just the general public, but also politicians are convinced that the US news media have a liberal and pro-democratic bias. Along those lines, it's also been shown that strong conservatives and Republicans are more likely to distrust the news media.
Also, we found a really interesting study made by Journal of Media and Religion. And in this article, proves our point that Mormon college students view news media like that is not trustworthy, biased, and immoral.
So we began to ask questions to really answer this meta question. And the first one that we asked was, are those who watch CNN or Fox more likely to think the news media is politically biased? And as we can see from the following graph, we found that BYU-I students who frequently watch CNN believe the news media is politically biased. In comparison, those who watch Fox tend to think that the news media is less biased. So it's really interesting that we start to see this emergence of very diverse thoughts surrounding the news media, all depending on the kind of news media they're consuming.
Another question that we had was, are men or women more likely to think the news media is politically biased? Now, this is interesting because a lot of people tend to think that women spend more time on their phones, making them more likely to think this. However, as we can see on the graph, they're kind of balanced. There's a small variation of less than 1%. So the answer for this would be men and women both agree the news media is politically biased when coming specifically from social media.
The third question we asked is there a relationship between how frequently one consumes news media and whether they think it is more politically biased? From this graph, you can definitely see that people's perceptions are influenced by how much media they consume. So those who do consume more media or more news do believe that the media is politically biased.
And the fourth question that we wanted to answer was if Republicans and conservatives or Democrats or progressives tend to feel like Trump was treated unfairly by the news media. And the exact question was, is there a relationship between one's political leaning and whether one thinks Trump was treated fairly in the news media? And we did find that Republicans and conservatives do tend to believe that Trump was treated unfair by the news media whenever compared to progressives or Democrats. And we see this trend line here on this regression showing that the more conservative someone is, the more they agree that Trump was treated unfairly by the news media when he was president.
The last question we're going to present is, are those who use social media to stay informed more likely to think the news media is politically biased? And the answer to this question that we found is those who believe the news media often favors one political side over the other tend to believe the news they read is inaccurate. So in other words, those who use media to inform themselves, they think is political bias.
And it's very interesting now that April mentioned that last figure, because I have a friend who is a BYU-Idaho student who I met in my first semester here. And he came to me very excited to talk about the ex-president of my country, Evo Morales. And, Bolivia is not a very well-known country, so I was really excited that he knew about him. And he ended up telling me how amazing he was and how great things he had done. And I was in shock because he got all this information from social media, from websites, from online newspapers, but the information was very inaccurate, because if you ask any South American or any Bolivian, their opinion on Evo Morales is that he was a dictator because he was on the power for more than 14 years. He's an apprentice to the government style of Venezuela, of Cuba. He changed the constitution of the country so that he could be benefited and build a museum of himself for more than $1 million. And Bolivia is a very poor country. So it's interesting to see that this not only relates to a national level, but also internationally.
So today we've been able to discuss what experts have to say surrounding political bias, our own findings, and some of the impact this topic has all over the world. So do BYU-I students think the news media is politically biased? Yes, and they may have good reason to think so.